the chaos is continuing to rain down. In my case, quite literally. This one's a few days late, mainly because I've had over 1,000 millimetres of rain fall at my place over the last 3 days. For my overseas and American listeners, that's 40 inches of rain in the past 72 hours. It is Saturday evening, the 26th of February. I'm finding it interesting how I'm dating when I record this stuff at the moment. It's like all these seminal moments where we have to, for posterity's sake, understand when and where this was recorded. I bring you this week Damis Artson, and we discussed conspiracy and control. This one has been in the works for a little while, and I can't tell you what a privilege it was to have Damis on the podcast. His depth of knowledge in these topics was astounding. This is another one of those ones that I haven't listened back to all of it. I listened back to a little bit to get the feel for the intro. However, I need to listen back to this one to compute all that was said. Damis is an author, and he's got a book out, and he's working on a couple of more. Make sure you check the links in the show notes to follow him on all his stuff. The conversations and the content that's coming out of the UTC has been excellent recently. I had an excellent interview today that I'm going to keep mum about for the moment. However, behind that is episode 3, 4, 5 of the book by Max Egan. I really hope you're enjoying the content. We are trying to step it up here. Pass the word around if you're enjoying it. Let people know. This is a down under indie podcast operated out of my shed in a little studio we call the Refinery. And it's a privilege to be a part of it and see it grow. Remember, we are on Patreon. If anyone wants to chuck a couple of dollars our way, that'd be awesome. If not, totally cool. Please just share and spread the word and the knowledge. To my fellow Queenslanders, as I record this, I hope you're dry. Please stay safe. Look after yourself, look after each other. Thank you again to Damis for coming on the show. We've already got another one in the works, which is going to be awesome as well. Thanks to Jono for the intro. Thanks to all you awesome listeners. It is the time of the Kali Yuga. However, that doesn't mean we can't be cool and be kind to each other, because love is the answer at the end of the day. Thanks very much, guys. Be patient, engage discipline, and we'll talk soon. Cheers.
What you said is what you got. So the only information, depending on the one. While we're waiting on the world to change. We keep waiting on the world to change. It's not that we don't care, we just know
G'day, everyone. Welcome back. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dan, all the way from Colorado, to the podcast, mate. How you going,
Doing well, Triff. How you doing?
mate? Yeah. Look, I think you know what's the problem. Yes, I am doing well. Do you know why I'm doing well? Because I'm here in the refinery talking to you. But overall, is anyone doing well, mate? I think that's one of the lies we tell ourselves. You know what I mean? I think that's
Yeah.
I think that's one of the issues, isn't it? Myself and Dan have been talking for a couple of years now, haven't we, mate? This one's been in the pipeline since before
Yeah.
COVID. You wrote a book and you sent it through to me, and not too sure if you want to talk much about that. I did have just a question as to, because that was a joke. A joke. There's a good start, eh? That was a book. That was a book of personal discovery, is how I read it. Right, it was a story.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
could see in the background that it was your personal journey being put onto paper through characters and timelines and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then I suppose 2020 hit, mate. You know what I mean? The only question I had about the book is, how do you see it now, considering, that was, it seems like, my running joke is, remember back in 2019, 4,500 years ago, do you remember?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how's the perspective on that,
No, I understand completely. For me, that was a story that I wanted to. I spent a decade thinking how to tell that story because of some really profound experiences that I had had.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, I had some time to kind of work out the details. But what I never had was the ending of the book. So fast forward to the pandemic, the shutdown. First time in my life, I'm not working a million hours, and I've got some time to sit down and get some writing done.
Mm-hmm.
And I went into this with with everything figured out but the ending. And suddenly I'm sitting in the middle of the pandemic, and my life, which is kind of the story, kind of ends up in this moment. And so really I knew that I had to take some liberties and take some assumptions because it stretches out beyond where we were now. But the whole point of that was just to kind of create this universe in which there's going to be some more books coming through.
Yeah.
That'll kind of tie this personal story that was really an exploration, like you were talking about, of my journey into being a fictional character in the next series of books that I do. So it was I tried to take an optimistic, rosy outlook at the end of the book. I tried to see the light, and push something positive. Of course, it didn't pan out like that.
No, it didn't, unfortunately, mate.
But it wasn't meant. I wasn't trying to be predictive. I was just trying to be hopeful. And it is what it was at the end. But it was something that I really enjoyed getting the chance to do, and I'm looking forward to all the future writing that I've got going on right now. So.
Yeah, look, it was interesting, man, because I'd read. I'll be honest, I read half of it and it sort of got lost in the pile. I mean, as you can see, there's a bookcase behind me. There's another one over this way. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many books. Over there too, yeah, there's so many books. Sure. And then it fell out of a pile. I'm like, I haven't finished reading that. And I started reading it again. And then, like, 3 days later, you got back in touch with me. And I'm like, yeah, well, we got to sort this out now. You know what I mean? We got to try and, because it was a little bit coincidental. Well, there is no coincidence, you know what I mean? And been looking forward to sitting down with you, man. And you sent me a pretty lengthy email about some of the stuff you're looking into. And I suppose for posterity's sake, it's the 19th for me and the 18th for you of February 2022. In the last week down under, it's been shown and proven that they used long-range audio devices on freedom protesters, potential some sort of direct energy weapons causing burns and stuff on the skins of protesters and children and babies, just for the record. And this morning, the old, I don't know, what do we call him? Trudeau, Commissar Trudeau, got enough people together to attack the truckers in Ottawa just for wanting freedom. And I think for those of us that are holding a line and looking at this stuff objectively, it's a long-term game, isn't it? And this isn't something that's just happened the last 2 years. This isn't something that has just materialized out of nothing. And it's becoming quite obvious, there's that golden list on YouTube. If we had mentioned, the lab leak theory a year ago, we'd be shut down on all social media platforms. Now that's common knowledge. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're dealing with an experimental medication that clearly doesn't work anymore, if it ever worked to begin with. And, you know, all the things, all of the above. However, I don't want to spend as much as I want to know how you are and how your family is, and, you know, maybe a little brief part about that. And let's deep dive into some of these, because your research is taking you down conspiracy theories, hasn't it, mate? So, and I did do inverted commas for the audio listeners there.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
at this point they probably should be called spoiler alerts. But you know, what is it? We're 16-0, mate. The conspiracy series to 16-0 so far.
Yeah, well, what does Adam Curry say? The Podfather, right? He says he's a conspiracy therapist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, conspiracy therapist. Yeah, the old Podfather himself.
Yeah.
So how are you, mate? What is it over there? And then maybe we'll jump into some of the topics we wanted to talk about today.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, we're doing good over here. It's America's been a place of contention for so long now that we're all just used to it. You know, there's a division that's been purposely generated into society, and we're all living with that. And you know, my point and my purpose at this, you know, at this point in history is to take a look at that and figure what we can do to fight back against it, because you know it's been far too long that we've allowed all these divisions to occur. And you know, that's why, you know, I'm a fiction writer. That's what I enjoy doing. But you know, I've got some great friends, you know, like you do, and we have some great conversations. And you know, what I've kind of just come to the point of now is just realizing that, okay, the narratives are out of control at this point. There's no difference between the term narrative and propaganda. You know, anybody who's studied propaganda as a student of history understands how it works, and anybody who takes a look around at what's going on today understands that we are knee deep in propaganda everywhere we turn.
Absolutely.
And you know, part of the thing for me was having to realize, you know, everywhere I looked, all around me, all the conversations that I overheard or partaking in were, you know, people have just they've turned a blind eye. They're buying into the narrative of American greatness, global greatness, Western greatness, in ways that are really alarming, because it seems like we've forgotten our own history. And you know, in my country, I don't know how it is for you, but I assume it's probably similar. But we have this amnesia that's taken place. And so, you know, what I wanted to do was start putting together an idea to work with a couple of friends. I have a really talented journalist friend. And we wanted to kind of write a book on the history of conspiracy and control.
Yes.
And the idea was, let's take a deep dive. Let's look at this as far back as we can take it. And let's understand the way the world works.
How's that, mate? Are you there?
All right, I'm here.
Yeah. So, look, I think you said for the audio, I can clean that up. That's no worries. Video, I can stitch it together as well. But you were saying you wanted to get together with a journalist friend of yours and talk about conspiracy and control, right? That's where it sort of cut out. We should be okay now. I've gone to hotspot.
Okay.
So yeah, we're talking about conspiracy and control with a friend of yours, a journalist friend of yours, which I've got questions about as well.
Sure.
What his perspective is, or her perspective. I'm not too sure, he or she.
It's a him, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so with the project, you were talking about conspiracy and control. And I think just to add to that, like you can't really see the titles of these books, but most of them are history books now. And it's those of us that are students of history, as you said earlier, we know what's happening. It's quite clear to us what's happening. However, I suppose, and I'd be interested to get your perspective, I didn't realize how long it had been happening. It's been a slow burn, and then they just sort of tick the box and then let it run. And maybe part of us, because of the comfort and the good times that we've had, we didn't see it coming as we probably should have. But yeah, talk about the project, mate. Conspiracy and Control.
Yeah, so you know, the idea was just to take a look at what we could understand about. I guess the easiest way to kind of frame this is, you know, when we want to talk about things like lab leak theory, you know, there's a strange kind of energy about, you know, especially where we are here. I'm sure you're going through the same thing where, you know, anytime you want to talk about something that is a little outside of the accepted narrative, you know, the first label that gets thrown out now is conspiracy theorist. Joe Rogan, I think, was being accused of peddling misinformation.
Yes,
so
misinformation.
They didn't want to call him a conspiracy theorist, so they accused him of misinformation. But what you know, so I just wanted to kind of look into this idea and kind of understand, because I, as a student of history like you are, you know, I understand completely that there's a lot of real dark, you know, really dark activity that's gone on historically behind the scenes. And so, you know, what I was trying to work through was why, you know, the modern, you know, and from my perspective, American public seem to have no understanding. You know, it's just this, it's nothing but hoorah and our victories at wars and, you know, all the great things that Americans think they've done. But
isn't it interesting though, mate? I mean, from an Aussie's perspective, you haven't won a war in a long time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And like, it's a perception issue, isn't it? I mean, but that's an Aussie thing. We have down here. We've got we call tall poppy syndrome. So basically, what that, to translate that, is that if anyone sort of sticks their head up above the trench, they get it blown off, basically. And you've got to stay in the. It's like the crabs in the bucket. You've heard the crabs in the bucket analogy, right? You've got when you catch a heap of crabs, you put them in a bucket, right? And if one crab tries to escape, the other crabs will draw them back down into the bucket. It's like, no, you're not going anywhere either, you know. And I think coupled with that, that's an Australian sort of a thing. However, I do think it's the distractions. You know what I mean? You know, we could have a long, interesting conversation about this. You know what I mean? And what that's done. You know, the endless distraction, and I think for me the revealing thing. Because as you know, I appreciate your support. You're a long-term listener of the podcast, and you know, I delve into ancient mysteries, right? So I wasn't really in present time. You know, I've been looking into megalith stuff. I've been deep down in that hole, and I knew that everything was bullshit. However, the level is quite disturbing. You know, once you start opening your eyes, and again, our history. And it's not that long ago, as we're going to discuss as we move forward. Like, some of it is long ago, but some of these false flags, you know, some people still don't know what the Gulf of Tonkin is. You know, like there's that's the basic. There's the basic one, right, where Vietnam was a lie. You know, but we even go even sooner than that. Weapons of mass destruction, right? There wasn't any. You know, like. And then 20 years later, we just gave it all back to them. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, how do we? And the stuff that's just been swept under the rug the last 2 years as well. I mean, UFOs are real. You know, Afghanistan fell and we gave it back. You know, we spent 20 years to beat the Taliban to give it back to them. I mean, some of this stuff that's been normalized. And when you talk about propaganda, that's what you're talking about. How have we demonized coughs and sneezes, but normalized myocarditis, pericarditis, and athletes just falling dead on the field? You know, like people just dropping dead. And that's because of the experimental medication that we've been, you know, coerced to take. But where do you want to start, mate? Where do you want to start? We sort of talked about the Knights Templar, because I mean, how far back did you go? I mean, it never ends, I suppose. You know, back to written history.
Yeah, well, you know, for me, when I set out with this project, you know, I wanted to look at, and we kind of exchanged about this, but you know, we threw the term "follow the money" out there, and so, you know, I decided, you know what, let's start there. That's where I'm going to start, just for fun. You know, I'm going to follow the money, and if you follow the money in a global theater, I think it makes sense to start with the banks. Yeah. So I wanted to understand the international banking system, the history of the international banking system. And I said, all right, I'm going to start with the most boring part of this and dive in right away, you know, and just get that part over with. Well, to my surprise, something I was not aware of when I started researching the history of banking, what happened was I ended up at the Knights Templar. So
right.
I thought it was going to be a really boring deep dive. And, the thing I find out in the first part of this was, that essentially the Knights Templar are responsible for what we consider to be modern banking practices. The Hebrews and the Jewish religion were, when they talked about giving loans to people, for them, it was considered, essentially immoral to charge interest rates on those loans. So the Knights were an interesting group of characters because essentially they were formed as a Catholic military order. Yeah. And, this was after the First Crusade. And what they were doing was, and everybody knows this part of the story, they were protecting the Christian pilgrims who were, getting an opportunity to go to Jerusalem for the first time. And so one of the problems that they ran into was there was a lot of people, getting robbed on the journey. So they came up with a very inventive practice of, holding the valuables of these pilgrims and then giving them a check. So they would check in at a Templar station from where they were leaving, and they would turn in their valuables, and the Templars would give them a check of sorts, and then they would take that to a Templar station in Jerusalem and be giving funds for that check, and then when they went back they would get their important stuff from them. So in a way it was a lot of historians agree that this was the real first advent of the modern banking system. And the story of the Templars has been told a million times, and it's rooted in conspiracy and silly stuff. But when you really start to scratch under the surface, a lot of people, one of the things about the Templars is they're known as their true title was the poor fellow soldiers of Christ, and of the Temple of Solomon. And that's how they were known. These were very poor, religious people, brave fighting force that were carrying on, and one of the most deadly military units in the Crusades. But what happened was they got very rich very fast. And there's a lot of theories as to how that happened. And that to me has been part of the interesting aspect of this is when you kind of look through the stories, you always hear the story of how, for instance, they moved into the Temple Mount, which is known as Solomon's Temple. And, the story goes that they were digging underneath there and they found the Ark of the Covenant. They found all these religious items, and somehow finding these items created all their wealth. I'm very skeptical of that. I'm not sure how I feel about that either way. But what is clear to me was that, they were loaning out a lot of money, and through interest rates were picking up a lot of money in the process. And they became very powerful, very fast. They had installations, compounds, land all over Europe very quickly. And so when I was kind of trying to understand this, one of the things that I stumbled across was also the fact that they're considered the first international corporation. So you've got the first multinational corporation that invented the modern banking model, tied up in Christianity with a little bow there. And, one of the things that was interesting also is they were considered a charity at the time. So they were the favored charity throughout Christendom. People loved contributing to their cause and helping build them up, if they were Christian, of course.
Well, God loves you, mate. God loves you, but he needs your money. He's broke.
Yeah, as George Carlin once said, right?
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right.
He just can't handle money.
Yeah, that's right. He loves you, but he's broke. He's not really.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely.
So Ed, look, you mentioned that the Temple of Solomon keeps coming back around, and it's actually part of the other research that I'm looking at, because that was, interestingly, the Temple of Solomon was technically the first lodge of the Masons was built during the building of the Temple of Solomon, and that came from Dionysian architects that were in Tyre, in that region of the world. But anyway, there's an ancient megalith connection there, and I do wonder about when you say treasure, and I can see why you'd be skeptical about that, but understand majority of these temples were built on existing temples as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, there may have been treasure. There may have been, the Ark of the Covenant, is supposedly, well, the Ark is supposed to be in Cambodia apparently, but no one really knows. Which is a weird spot.
Yeah. No, I've followed that trail myself, but the one thing I found, you can't debate that the Temple of Solomon was built to house the Ark of the Covenant. And it was meant to be the first temple for Yahweh, for God.
Mm-hmm.
So that's literally the lore of it, so I understand, why that's the case. But, one of the things that I found as I get into these things is, I feel like if you kind of look at what the narrative is, and then you follow it back to its root, you can usually find a pivot point where I think the real information starts to occur away from the narrative that has been told to the public for a long time.
Yeah. What happened? So obviously, you're talking about the first banking system, and this is just from memory. Weren't the Templar ran out? Didn't the church hunt them down? Is that how it finished? The Knights Templar? Didn't the church hunt them down for some reason or another? And is that because they had a lot of money? Is that one of the reasons, or?
Yeah. So, I think if we're going to talk about this part, I think it's important to talk about Solomon. So, obviously they invoke Solomon in their name.
Yeah.
So for me, once I read this, I'm like, okay, I need to do a deep dive into Solomon. I know a lot about various religions, but, I don't really know much about him. So Solomon was an interesting guy. He lived 970 to 931 BCE. He was the son of King David.
Mm-hmm.
He was married to the Pharaoh's daughter. He actually had 700 wives and 300 concubines.
Wow.
He got a lot of criticism from the holy people around him because he was considered an adulterer. But
you're pushing 1,000.
So he's an interesting guy. He's pushing 1,000 exactly. So obviously, some of the more interesting things about Solomon, when and I went back and I read through all the texts. I didn't just look at the Bible.
Yeah.
I read through Islamic texts. I read through, everything I could find to kind of understand who the idea of this person was.
Yeah.
And he was a magician. He was an exorcist. He was the most wealthy king of Israel. So, everywhere I read, for some reason, it's known that he collected 666 talents of gold per year. He was a builder. He built the temple, as you were talking about with, I'm sorry, his name's eluding me at the moment, but I'm sorry, King Hiram of Tyre.
Yeah.
Hiram.
Yeah, Hiram.
Not to be confused with the architect. Yeah, Hiram. Thank you. Yeah, and Hiram, the architect, as you were pointing out, is the most important figure in Freemasonry.
Yes, that's
so.
Right.
The connection between Freemasonry and the Knights Templar is unavoidable. It's absolutely 100% true. There was no historian that would debate or try to say that isn't the thing.
Yeah.
But you were dead on. So one of the things that the Templars said, and I'm sorry, let me back up for a second because I should finish about Solomon.
Yeah.
A couple other things known about Solomon was if you read the Testament of Solomon, it's stated that he worships Moloch. I thought that was really interesting because, as we know, the famous Alex Jones video where he goes to Bohemian Grove, and you've got all these politicians sitting around worshiping Moloch, the owl god, right?
Yeah.
So that goes all the way back to Solomon through the Knights Templar, that tradition. But he was also known to have been given a ring that was in some debate. Some people debated. There's some people that say it was the Star of David ring. I've read a lot of accounts that say it was a pentagram, and that pentagram essentially was given to him by Archangel Michael and allowed him to control demons, including Asmodeus, who was an early prototype for what we would talk about as being the devil or Satan.
Right.
And of course, he was. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're right. I'd remind me about the pentagram when you finished your discussion.
Yeah, no. And of course, like we said, he was known to, or he was alleged to have been the keeper of the Ark of the Covenant, and pretty interesting story all in all. I think most of the story ends with his affair with the Queen of Sheba. Which goes back to some of those beliefs that, the Ark could be in Ethiopia at this point, where there's According to the reading I looked at, it sounds like at one point the Ethiopian Christians were given a version of a replica of the Ark of the Covenant, and it sounds like that's most likely what's probably in that church there. But regardless, when you kind of put all this stuff together, he's a very dark individual who seems to be embraced by Christianity in strange ways, but highly criticized regardless, even during his time. When you jump forward, I'm sorry, go ahead. No, please.
No, you're right, mate. It's so fascinating. We've got to deal with the delay. There's probably about half a second delay between us. I think it's fascinating when we talk about, as say, King Solomon, the Dionysian architects, Hiram the king and also Hiram the architect. I think you're right. They are two separate people, Hiram being the founding mason.
Yeah.
But more importantly, I mean, some of the most impressive megalithic architecture is actually found in that area. That's just down the road from Baalbek, and there's some, like Tyre is one of those ones that is on the list for the podcast to dig into. I was actually fortunate enough in the cupboard over there's some Masonic documents. My grandfather was a Mason. He was a 3rd degree Mason, and he left me some of his documentation that I probably shouldn't have. However, it does talk about Hiram and the Bacchus being the god of wine, which is Dionysus as well. And I think you talked about, Malak, and what's interesting about these figures is that, Christianity embraced them, but I wonder why. I mean, look, number one, Christianity, it's all the same religion: Christianity, Islam, Jehovah. Like, pick your flavor. It's not actually anything different, which makes it. I don't understand why they're fighting each other, but don't let common sense or critical thinking get in the way of a good story, Dan. And the Tyre stuff, it would make sense to me that there is some sort of treasure. I see a lot of these older kings. I mean, if they're, if we play with the cataclysm thing and we play with the idea that there was an advanced civilization that existed prior to us, then we've got this generation of kings, and they're getting their own wealth through that period of time, and maybe they did find the opening to these chambers, you know what I mean, or they found something. And there's all these it's almost like technology, isn't it, right? So it's like a power ring, the Ark of the Covenant. There's all these things that it's peppered throughout the original Bible as well that everyone seems to ignore. The mention of giants in the Bible is crazy, but that's a different story. And what I find interesting is, like, you talk about the pentagram. If I look that way, there's a pentagram on the front of the studio door, right? Because in the original pagan religion, and look, pagan again is in inverted commas because that's how we understand it now. However, that's actually a symbol of protection, Dan. That's earth, air, fire, water, ether. That's what it is. And that you talk about the Crusades, part of what they would do, because people would have a pentagram on their door as a symbol of protection for the house, right? Which is one of the reasons I've got it on the studio. And that symbol, the Knights Templar or the Crusaders would kick down that door and go, basically, join us or die. I mean, that was your option. Even when these people that were commanding them were still honoring the old ways to a certain degree. We could, obviously Christmas, Easter, all those sorts of things. King Solomon's an interesting character, and you've given me some more information. And again, he built his temple to house his treasure, wasn't it? That was, but it was a dedication to Yahweh, apparently. However, and there's all these, 666 and all this sort of stuff. Again, 666 is part of sacred geometry, Dan. Like that's the sort of stuff that binds the universe together. It's not exactly, in once upon a time in history, it would not be a demonic number at all. That's part of understanding who we are and the fabric of our existence. But it's interesting how they take those things and twist them into darkness,
Yeah, no, and I think that's the point I'm essentially overall trying to make is there's a narrative here that's being crafted, and this narrative can be found when you hit these points with Solomon another thing that you find with him is that he was responsible for kind of repairing and rebuilding Megiddo, and that of course is translates in the Greek to the Armageddon. So it's interesting where you see this kind of crafting of narrative, and you have to kind of like dive into this. And we convert. We went back and forth a little bit and mentioned astrotheology, which I think is an interesting topic for us to get into, at some point here. But I think it's important to understand that. Just to stay on the Templars while we're still there.
Yeah. Let's finish with the Templars. Yeah.
Yeah, because you asked me a question, I gave you a really long answer. So
yeah, no, mate. This is there is no short answers on unlocking the code, mate. The longer the better. I think it's fascinating because because the thing is that we're a world away from each other, and you've delved into things that I don't know about. I've delved into things that you don't know about, and I think knowledge is power. Yes, however, it's nothing if it isn't shared, mate. So don't ever worry about long-winded answers where I've got no timekeeper today, so we'll just go as long as we feel. I think it's totally fine, mate, and I'm really enjoying it. So what else about the Knights Templar? I mean, how would we tie
to back up and answer your question, one of the criticisms of the Templars when they were wildly powerful was that their order involved a lot of secrecy, and we know now that the initiation ceremonies of the Templars have been carried down through the Masons.
Yes.
So that's something that's been there from the very beginning. And so, a long story short, what happened was King Philip IV of France was into the Templars for a lot of money. And, he didn't want to pay it back realistically, according to, kind of the historians that I've been reading. And so he played into the distrust and the secrecy of the Templars. And some of the rumors that were circulating, they were said to have worshipped Baphomet, who is the kind of satanic image we think of as being the devil. Baal, is related to the idea of Baphomet. And so, he tried to play up this distrust of them. And, he managed to have some sway over the Pope at the time, and convinced him that the right thing to do was to go after the Templars, because they were a threat to Christendom at that point, is what he was going to argue. And the Pope at the time fell for that and said, okay, that, we're going to do this thing. And then, the infamous date is Friday the 13th, 1307.
Yep.
Essentially the French Templars were taken into custody. Many of them put on trial. Many of them burned at the stake. And the way the story goes is some of the Templars in France understood, what was coming. It had been building for a while, and they got a heads up knowledge, and they jumped in their ships with their treasures, and they sailed out into the oceans, and are forgotten by time mostly after that. And that's where, I got a little curious, because I knew that, based on my research, these guys had owned land all over Europe. I mean, it wasn't just France. They were a very powerful group, of private military soldiers.
Well, they own land all the way from, all the way to the Holy Land, wasn't it? Basically,
absolutely.
Their crusades took them everywhere. So. And if they're doing that thing in each place, like you said before, it's like, yeah, you can come with us. We'll just we'll take your valuable stuff and give you a check, a traveler's check, I suppose, is probably the best way to interpret it in the modern day. However, so you think that they were the basis of some of these other banking systems then? Is that am I picking up what you're putting down there? Are we talking about some of these other families?
Absolutely. I mean, as well as other things too, because, you can trace what the Templars did after that time in France. And, interestingly enough, they, it's pretty well established now that they had a huge part to play in the formation of Portugal. They went over to Scotland, teamed up with Robert the Bruce, and there's a pretty famous battle that was won by Robert the Bruce that talks about the White Knights with the red mantle. So it's pretty understood that this was the connection where the Templars got involved with Scottish Freemasonry, essentially, from a historic perspective. So one of the things I also find interesting was, I don't know if you've seen some of the research about, the probability that the Templars made it all the way to America. There's some good evidence that perhaps, they spent some time here in America and left some marks. And there's some, geologists that feel really passionate about this, and some, archaeologists that are looking into these more kind of, they're not proven theories, but they're interesting nonetheless. And there's a lot of good circumstantial evidence. But one of the things I think that's really important that I found in my research was this whole thing that happened with the Masons in France in 1307 was pretty well predicted by the Templars at the time. Excuse me, I said Masons, I meant Templars. One of the same at this point. But as I was kind of looking around the world at what was going on at this time, one of the things that stood out to me was a little kind of story that was brewing in Europe. You essentially had this region that was kind of undeclared in between France and Germany, Belgium, Liechtenstein. And this became the part of the Alps, and eventually became the country we know today as Switzerland. And this was something I kind of just, it was really just a simple thing that kind of led me to this, which was, if you look at the Swiss flag, essentially
I was just about to say that, the white cross on the red background.
Yeah, it's an inversed image, right? Instead of being the red cross on the white mantle, it's the white cross on the red mantle. Sure. And I just thought that was interesting. So I wanted to understand the formation of Switzerland, how it came to be, the Swiss Confederacy came to power, and all of that. And, one of the things I found really interesting was, kind of diving into this before I got into Switzerland, was I came across the Chinon parchment. If you're familiar with the Chinon area of France. And essentially it was
that's a new one, mate. Chinon parchment. Expand.
Yeah, so this was dated August 1308. There was a parchment that was discovered in the Vatican secret archives by a researcher named Barbara Frail. And apparently it had been, she discovered it by accident because it had been filed in the wrong place in 1628. So, essentially what she realized was that Pope Clement had absolved the Templars of all heresies in 1308. Which was just a year after all this happened. And then, formally disbanded the order in 1312. And then there was another Chinon parchment that addressed King Philip IV of France. And basically what this parchment said was that the Templars that had confessed to heresy were tortured, and that they weren't legitimate crimes. So they restored the Templars who were involved with this. They restored the sacraments and gave them back to the unity of the church. And then there was another Chinon parchment that's well known to historians that kind of details this. So the interesting part was I kind of jumped over and looked, and I wanted to see the current position of the Roman Catholic Church. And they say that basically the persecution of the Knights Templar was unjust. And that Pope Clement had pressed his actions essentially by the magnitude of the public scandal that was dominating the time. So
he buckled to peer pressure.
Kind of interesting that we find this little tidbit, kind of nestled in there, because as I kind of dove into Switzerland, what I found to be kind of some interesting stuff, like it's like. Switzerland was founded in 1291, so this was maybe 15 years or so. My math isn't great, but before essentially the French Templars were chased out of France. And what we know about Switzerland has always been there was a short period of time where they weren't a neutral territory. They were actually at the service of the Catholic Church. They're a very Christian nation, always have been.
Well, I mean, the Swiss Guard, the Swiss Guard is one of those things now, even today.
And for people that don't know about the Swiss Guard, it's really interesting because what the Swiss Guard are is they're Swiss mercenaries that were hired by the Pope, essentially, to fight in a couple of wars that they had. And then by that point, eventually Switzerland had declared themselves neutral. And eventually that turned into what we know today as armed neutrality. What they believed in was that they weren't going to get involved with other people's wars, but they believed in military preparedness without commitment.
Yeah.
So, kind of interesting when you take this kind of, look at it. It's like, okay, well, they decided they were going to be neutral. They became a banking system, essentially, from a country perspective. But to go back to this armed neutrality, I think it's important to talk about the fact that when you look at Switzerland and kind of putting this model forward, you see an interesting example of it later on when Catherine the Great is in power, and she's negotiating with America to over the land that we know today as Alaska. And so what she did was she created the first League of Armed Neutrality, and this was after the American Revolution. So it was essentially an agreement that America and Russia had that turned into what we know today as international maritime law. And for the deep dive of people that have researched international maritime law, that kind of leads to the modern judicial system that we have today. So I always think about, like, when you go into the courtroom and if you're going to be testifying, you walk past that little door. I don't know the technical name of it. That little gate that opens up, and then you sit down and it closes, and that's a symbolic of the idea of you're boarding a ship and you're under maritime law at that point. So our entire judicial system is kind of rooted in that, so it's interesting to kind of see how these little things just build and build. One of the things that, as I started diving into Switzerland just to understand it better and learn more about it, was the Red Cross. And the Red Cross is a red cross on a white flag. And it was founded, they say, to protect human life and health, and to ensure respect for all human beings, and to prevent and alleviate human suffering.
Isn't that fascinating? Because the symbolic, what's the first aid? The first aid is still a cross, mate. You know what I mean? Like that there's all these symbols that carry through for thousands and thousands of years, and no one has any idea. No one has any idea. As I sit here and listen to you talk, Dan, it's we could all, I think we all wish we were three people, because it's like, wow, this sounds really, really fascinating. I'm in so many rabbit holes, I don't know where I am anymore. However, I'd like to jump into your one as well, because it's like, wow, I'm making connections that I'd thought about but not really researched, and you talk about all the money and the gold and all that sort of stuff. What do you do in Switzerland, mate? That's where you hide your gold,
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about what the Templars, when we were talking about before, and what I was saying was they were known as being the biggest charity in Christendom. And the Red Cross today is the biggest charity in the world.
Christendom,
so,
it's still the biggest charity in Christendom.
Yeah. So now, given this is circumstantial, there's nothing I can say for sure, but man, the imagery and the symbology is just in our faces, So, I wanted to keep learning more about Switzerland, and one of the things I found interesting was that the Habsburgs, who we've communicated a little bit about. If I was to say to people today that there was a family, a powerful family that controlled the world, I'd be labeled a nut job and a conspiracy theorist. But all you have to do is go back and research the Habsburgs, and you understand pretty clearly, because one of the interesting things when you just Google the Habsburgs is you just look at all the positions of power that they held as a family. They were monarchs of every country in Europe, every duke title, every archduke title, popes. There's no position of power that the Habsburgs didn't inhabit at one point or another. So in fact, they were a family that ran the world, and there's no debating that historically. And they pulled their name Habsburg from a castle in Switzerland, which I just found to be an interesting little tidbit as I was going through all this.
What I find,
and of course,
that one of the thought, just because you mentioned castles, what I thought So Switzerland was only founded in, what did you say, 1391 or whatever it was, or 1291. The architecture and the masonry and the beauty of those mansions and the churches in the Alps and stuff like that, the amount of treasure and skill and all the things that were needed to actually build that stuff. And if you, as we say, we can switch out Templar and Mason at any point, it doesn't really make a difference, right? So they were obviously connected to the Solomon Temple. The Solomon Temple's connected to the Masons, which were connected to the ancient art of masonry, which came from King Tyre, Haram. You know what I mean? Like there's so many. I'm just seeing the dots are lining up. You know, and they're still, you know, that's where, you know, you want to hide your money, you go to Switzerland, right? You know, the seat of power in the world, the money that's missing from every government is probably in Switzerland right now. And then you've got a, you know, part of the modern conspiracy, if we, you know, flick towards modern day, it's like, who is actually in control? You know, I had a guy, I said 2 companies, I was talking to a guy and he's attached to the narrative, right? And he's like, I said, 2 companies pretty much own everything. He's like, no, they don't. I said, well, BlackRock's one of them. You know, that's an individual company that owns everything. You know, like it's not like they're not competing against each other. That is one entity that exists that controls everything that we see and do and use. And it's like the reality of a controlling force on the planet. I mean, you could, you know, I you know, the Habsburgs, but obviously you think of Rothschild, you know, the Rothschild family, you think of all this sort of stuff. And if you talk about the money as well, I don't know what the number was. A little while ago, it's like, oh, the world owes $214 trillion. To who? You know what I mean? What, the Decepticons? Like, who do we owe the money to? You know what I mean? Like,
well, yeah, no, I know exactly what you're saying. And, you know, when you look at Switzerland, I mean, aside from them being, you know, the banking capital of the world, and they're also the seat of power right now. So, you know, when you look at the organizations that are in Switzerland today, I mean, you've got the World Trade Organization is headquartered there. The World Health Organization is headquartered there. The International Labor Organization, you know, ironically FIFA, and it's also, you know, home to the UN, whereas a lot of people think of New York as being the kind of headquarters of the UN. The second biggest facility is in Switzerland. You know, and these were things I kind of knew, and I found to be interesting as I was researching. But what I kind of learned new for me that I wasn't aware of was the Bank of International Settlements. And, you know, that part of the research for me was really the honey hole, so to speak. Because when you look into the history of the BIS, you learn some really, really interesting things. So the Bank of International Settlements is still around today. If you go to their website, it says they foster international monetary and financial cooperation, and they serve as a bank for the central banks.
I love the wording of these guys. I love the wording of these guys.
Oh yeah, absolutely, man. They're great. But you know, you look at the history of Europe, and a lot of the really dark elements of the history, you know, fall onto the central banks, which is why, you know, supposedly the founders fought so hard against central banks for so long, and it wasn't until after the Great Depression that the Federal Reserve was formed and it was official. Yeah, you know, and I don't know how I feel about that story. I think maybe it was probably already kind of in the works anyway, and there's a lot of great rumors about
the First World War, mate. I think is where we're looking at. I mean, the First World War, a lot of people don't understand, was between cousins. You know, you talk about the Habsburgs. I'm pretty sure that was that. It wasn't that family, but it was an extension of that family. And yeah, the first that meat grinder of First World War was between cousins. You know, and you can see that's when the industrial might of the US was first recognized, and you know the transfer of wealth from greater Europe into the US happened then. You know, and I think that's and look, you could have we could open up a story about the Great Depression that obviously originated in the US, whether or not that was actually not real, but whether or not it was manufactured to create the need for the Federal Reserve, and these are and again, how dark and how deep do you want to get? That's the problem with this stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, there's not. I don't know how much pushback there is now, even today in America, when we talk about Morgan's influence on the situation, because JP Morgan spread a bunch of rumors saying the banks were insolvent, which caused the rush on the banks, right? Like there was definitely a reason why everybody tried to withdraw their money.
Yeah.
And when they went to withdraw their money and they couldn't, the Great Depression happened. So that was all based, according to what I've read, on rumors started most likely by JP Morgan. But you said World War I, and this is where you find the birth of the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements. So that bank was created by the central banks essentially to as an intergovernmental agreement between Germany, Belgium, France, the UK, Italy, Japan, and the US. Ironically, all of the people involved in World War II. And who owns the BIS? The central banks own the BIS, of course, as we said. You know what I mean? Yeah. So essentially what happened was, after World War I, the Germans were found guilty of starting a war and causing a lot of problems, obviously, and they owed reparations to a lot of countries. And so this bank was formed after the Treaty of Versailles to oversee the payment of those reparations. Now, interestingly enough, most of the people involved didn't think that the Germans were actually going to carry through with this. They had no faith in them. So that's when you kind of learn about the Young Plan. And so Owen D. Young, he was the head of RCA at the time and member of the Rockefeller Board of Trustees, essentially pitched a debt forgiveness loan, which was coordinated ultimately and executed by JP Morgan. So, what they did was they gave them a loan that consolidated the reparation debt, made money off that, and then we're going to oversee the payment on that. Now, what was interesting about this was it was established in 1930. In 1931, President Hoover declared a moratorium against this because he felt that the coming economic crisis was too severe and we couldn't ask Germany to repay this at the time. So, he put a stop on the reparation payments after they got this loan and received it. And then eventually, a year later from that, 1932, this debt was canceled completely. And I'm talking about the reparation debt, not the loan debt, right? So they still owed the money to the banks.
They're still paying interest. They're still paying interest, yeah.
Oh, yeah. They just didn't owe it to the countries that they had tore up because of World War I.
That's one of my other things. You think no one cares, Dan? Stop paying your bills, mate. They care.
Oh yeah, absolutely, my friend. But this was one of their things that they were doing was they were kind of responsible for moving gold around the various European central banks. And they were supposed to be shut down multiple times because there was no purpose for them anymore. Once the reparations thing had been cleared out, there was really no need for the BIS. But somehow it carried on and continued, and people made sure it didn't shut down. So, jump ahead to World War II, and the bank says, hey, we understand there's a war going on, but we're going to, remain neutral through all of this. That good old word neutrality that always seems to come up. Which
really only means that they were selling to both sides, mate. That doesn't
absolutely all sides.
Yeah. They weren't neutral. Yeah. They were just supplying everybody.
Yeah, and this part of the story gets good because essentially you've got the UK, France, England, and Germany. All their central banks are tied up into the same banking project. And, they start to get worried because they see evidence that the BIS is actually making decisions that are helping the German Nazi Party. And, when you research this, you say that, you read that there was evidence of this. And so, I researched, okay, what's the evidence, and during the outbreak of World War II, if you look at the board of directors for the BIS, you've got Walter Funk, who was a prominent Nazi official, of course, a convicted war criminal. You've got Emil Pool, who was a Nazi economist. He was responsible for moving European gold that the Nazis looted into the banks of Germany. He's also credited with being the guy who thought up the idea to remove the gold dental fillings the Jews who were in the concentration camps, which also got added into the gold supply of the Germans at the time. And France and England and the UK said, listen, this isn't acceptable. We can't accept this. And another director at the time was Hermann Schmitz. He was the IB Farben director. And I don't know if you know much about IB Farben, but they were a chemical corporation that created Zyklon B, right? So that was the gas used in the chamber. So as the Jewish people would come into the camps, they would be removed from their valuables, which again ended up in the cache of wealth. And then they were, essentially gassed. There was a million people killed in those camps by that gas. And to not think that IG Farben isn't bad enough. What was their labor force? It was 30,000 Jews in Auschwitz. So in addition to using them as slave labor to develop these chemicals, then they decided that they could go ahead and test these chemicals on them as well. So just an absolutely ruthless corporation. It was interesting because when you look at the history of this company, they were very sympathetic, part of the German People's Party. They donated to the German People's Party before the Nazi Party came to power. And they were accused at the time of being a Jewish capitalist conspiracy company. And later on, they were one of the biggest donors to the Nazi Party and had cleansed all of their Jewish employees from the company. So, they turned on a dime real quick when it was convenient. And then the Nazis essentially pulled them in and took them over, and they were just essentially working for the Nazi government directly at that point. Another one of the people sitting on the BIS was Baron von Schroeder. He was a high-ranking SS official. He had the title. What was his title? It was Brigadier Führer.
Yes, that's the one.
So, all these guys I'm talking about, all convicted war criminals, all terrible people. If I tried to tell the story of some banking officials that were doing responsible for this stuff, at the highest levels, I'd be considered a nut job at the time. But sure, now we know today that this was a bank overseeing all the central banks that was rooting for the Nazis all along, and there's a rich history.
The question I've got there, mate, is how many of these guys fell into Operation Paperclip, and how many of these guys fell into the Russian operation? Like, how many of them were actually hung or, punished? I know a percentage of them were, but as a percentage of these dark figures became the background of, the post-World War II American governmental officials and projects, and then the Russian governmental officials and projects. We like to, I had, I don't know if you listened to the episode with Bob Newton. He was a fascinating guy. He's going to come back on soon. We're going to talk about megaliths instead of the chaos. And his question, and it really messed with my head, man, because his question was, who won World War II? You know what I mean? Like, who actually, what in the if you nail it down, because of what you're talking about, because of the money, because of the brains behind the operation, because of all of that stuff, actually, they didn't get killed, right? It was all the people that got killed, and then a fair percentage of these background demonic people were absorbed into our modern politics, basically, or the modern governments, from, as you say, England, France, Germany, Russia, America, this is the issue with some of this stuff,
Well, I think it raises the very important question of, this bank was overseeing, the money on every side of this war, including the Reconstruction.
That's right.
So there was at no point through this were they not making huge amounts of money together. Because let's be honest, we gotta always remember that the owners of this bank are all the banks, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It's interesting, and these weren't the only fascist bankers around, because when you look at American history, there was, and UK, there was a lot of sympathy for the Nazis. People loved Hitler before he started doing some of these more, awful, despicable
things. He was
things.
Times Man of the Year, wasn't he? There's that famous thing where he was, there was all these op-eds in Time and all this sort. He was Times Man of the Year, and his castles are amazing, and he's doing amazing things for his people, and look, and this stuff's lost to history. It's like, and look, prior to 1941, America was selling to both sides. Prior to 1917, America was selling to both sides. They were giving,
and still is. I mean, let's be clear, still
absolutely,
is,
absolutely. And you talk about, these people who are in charge of the bombs are also in charge of rebuilding it. Iraq, Afghanistan, just choose D, all the above. It's like, we got all these bombs, we need to drop them. Oh, and I've just got the contract to build the houses after we bombed them. So, it's
isn't
like,
that convenient?
Isn't that convenient? And it's like, and the one of the twisted stories out of Afghanistan is like, both Australian soldiers and American soldiers, because we fought side by side since World War One, in whatever conflict, they're guarding the poppy fields. Where did the poppy fields go to? They fed the pharmaceutical industrial complex, which we could have a very, we can just mic drop that there, because we've been under that regime for the last 2 years, and then, the bit of research that I've done into that, the banking behind that, the money that's behind the pharmaceutical industrial complex is probably the same twisted group of people, mate. You know what I mean? Like, it's not, there is no difference, you follow the money of what's going on at the moment, like, it's insane. And I bet you it all leads back to the same people you're talking about. It's like we're just being manipulated and controlled at a base level,
Well, when we picked apart the BIS, the names Rockefeller and Morgan again come up often. They were involved with the bank. And of course, after World War II, and all the things that, this board of directors had been involved with, it was, very obvious to everyone that this bank needed to be shut down. And of course, there was orders put into effect to shut it down. Interestingly enough, Keynes, the architect of Keynesian economics that we live under today, he fought really hard to keep the bank open. He's a great addition to our historical record. He got it all right, essentially.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's working perfectly. And I suppose, you can follow that, pull that on that thread, and then it obviously ends in Kennedy. Kennedy trying to say, listen, that was one of his things, wasn't it? These central banks are no good. These secret societies are no good. If we don't shut this down, they're going to take over and control everything. And then, then a lone gunman took a lucky shot.
Well, Kennedy's a whole nother interesting piece because, but I guess I should back up. So before I jump into Kennedy, one of the things that's always interested me in this country was there's a great piece of history that no Americans seem to know about, and that's called the banking plot. So again, if I told you there was a group of fascist American bankers who concocted a plan to overthrow FDR and the American government and install an authoritarian dictator, you would tell me, or most people would tell me, I'm a crazy. But in fact, when you look into the banking plot, you realize this was a real thing. So, and I would love to talk about this. If you're interested.
No, let's do it, man. Absolutely. Let's do it. I want to hear, because I don't know about this one either.
So this is a fascinating part of American history.
Before you start, Dan, the problem is that you're just disturbing me, mate. You know what I mean? Because
I'm sorry.
I've I know a little bit about some of this stuff you're talking about, and you're just basically expanding it. And I'm like, oh, okay, so it's been totally fucked from the start. That's good. That's really good to know. And here we are today, fighting for our basic freedoms across the world. However, tell us about the banking plot. How are they going to? Because I mean,
So
before we get there, mate, just a quick question, because you talk about banking and money and stuff like that. Obviously, the pandemic is slowing. I don't know what's happening over in the US, but we've got accelerating prices basically of every single commodity, fuel, food, everything. Like it's
same here. Inflation is rampant right now.
And it's like, I mean, and if we talk about banking, what is the next step of control, mate? You know what I mean? You outprice, you don't pay anybody anymore, but you outprice basically everything, like, and it's scary stuff, man. Anyway, I'm sure that's part of the banking plot. So share with us, mate.
Well, as we have these debates today of what's going on, and the word fascism gets thrown around a lot, I think it's important to think about, the fascism that encapsulated the power structure, back in the day was Mussolini style Mussolini style fascism.
Mm-hmm.
And Mussolini said that fascism was the merger of the corporation and the state. And, if that's not the description of what we're living through today, I don't know what is. So yeah, the banking plot was a fascinating tale of American history where essentially a group of banking elite.
What are we talking about, mate?
Post
World War II, or where set the scene, mate?
So this is around the New Deal time with the FDR administration. And a lot of the elite didn't like what they were seeing coming from FDR at the time. So they decided that he was going to be a problem and he needed to be removed. So the plan was to remove him from power and install an authoritarian dictator. So they debated about who the best candidate for this would be. And there was a general, his name was Smedley Butler, who was wildly popular at the time. He was
I know him.
A veteran of the wars. And, he wrote the book War is a Racket. Later after all this, but essentially what happened was he led a protest of World War I veterans into Washington, where he demanded that they be taken care of in terms of health care and benefits and things like that.
Yes.
That's still, what goes on today. Yeah. So he was considered a great American hero, and these bankers decided that if they could, if he was not a big fan of FDR, that he would be the perfect person to lead this plot.
Jocko,
or to be installed and be the figurehead of it.
Yeah, just for your reference and just for everyone else who's listening, Jocko Willink did an excellent review of that book, War is a Racket, across a couple of different episodes. Well worth a listen. Well worth a listen.
I was not aware of that, so I'll have to check that out.
Yeah. That's why I thought you might not be. Yeah, it's Jocko reviews, because I think after the fall of Afghanistan, you can imagine how Jocko feels. And he's been reviewing some of these texts. And he did do Smedley Butler's War is a Racket. And that was 2 or 3 or 4 episodes, I can't remember. But 12 hours of my life that was a little disturbing, because obviously he layered on with his experience that Jocko has had over the years. In the way he does it's very interesting, mate. So check that one out. But anyway, Smedley Butler.
Yeah, no, I will. I'm really glad to hear that Jocko dived into that. So before this was written by General Smedley Butler, so this group of fascist bankers, they were big fans of Hitler, big fans of what Mussolini was preaching. They went to him and they basically said, listen, FDR is a threat to American democracy. We need to remove him because he's obviously a socialist and probably in line with the communists. So we need somebody like yourself to step in and take over, and we'll work through all the details and get back to American democracy eventually. And Butler said, okay, that sounds like a good idea. Let's go with that. And really, obviously Butler was a great American patriot, and he knew what these guys were up to was very, very threatening. So what he did was he wanted to gather as much information about this plot as he could from the inside. And he reached out to a member of Congress and informed him of what was going on, and then kind of worked as an agent at that point to unveil or reveal as much as possible about what this plot was and what it meant to American order. So, he went all the way to the very end with these guys, and then, revealed what he had learned. All these people got dragged into congressional hearings. They were all found guilty of treason. And then at the last minute, FDR swoops in and basically exonerates them all and wipes their names from the books of history. There's a few names that have gotten out there over the years. It sounds like, based on my research, that Morgan and Rockefeller were definitely involved. So while they were clearly involved with the European system and the fascist model, they were also pushing it in America simultaneously. And then, of course, the name Prescott Bush comes up.
Yeah.
And, a deep dive into Prescott Bush reveals that he was running a bank in America during World War II that was funneling Nazi money.
Yes.
So it doesn't surprise me that he would be, involved and implicated in this, even though his name's been wiped from the record. So, a lot of people don't realize this happened, but it did. And why FDR decided to turn a blind eye to it.
Yeah, that was going to be my question.
It's an interesting part of the history of it. I don't know. His family was very powerful, and they rubbed elbows with all these people, and maybe they came to some understanding. Who knows?
They did a deal behind closed doors.
I mean, that, I can only speculate, but that's all historical fact. Again, it sounds like a completely made up story until you dig in. And, once again, you find that conspiracy is real. It happens. And, the people who don't understand that there's this history from our governments of pulling off these types of schemes are really lying to themselves.
A lot.
Yeah.
It's and I think one of my big struggles over the last couple of years, Dan, has been how far common sense and critical thinking has just gone the way of the dodo. Like, if you spend 15 minutes looking at what as the current narrative is falling apart day by day now, even though the governments of the world are still pushing it. That's why we've got LRADs and mounted police attacking people that just want to do their job. It's how is it, like, if in 2019 I had said, well, not you, but if you said you grab a general person, the government and the pharmaceutical industrial complex has got your best interests at heart, 90% of people would have said, no, they don't. No one trusted the governments in 2019. We were quite clearly seeing the opioid crisis, and it's so clear. It was so clear in 4,500 years ago in 2019 that these entities were not good. But given the right trigger, I think it's one of the things I use in my teaching if the class is open to it. If I was to grab a book that had how do you control the human population, page 1, rule 1 is fear and control, divide and conquer. That's it. That's it. And they pulled it off very well, actually, very well. But I think they've been conditioned, and like you say, Prescott Bush leads to George Senior, which leads to George Junior, which leads to the Clintons, which you know what I mean. Like there's actually a fairly easy way to see forward what's going on. And I think, you've got your American issues. I think part of the issue we have in Australia is I don't think we've ever left the penal colony behind. You know what I mean? I don't think we've ever gotten past the fact that we're a prison colony, to be perfectly honest. And we've been given rope. However, how quickly majority of the Aussies rolled over is been very disheartening to me. It's been very disturbing to me to see that. And because it's so clear, like you spend 10 minutes, just 10 minutes looking at it, and it's quite clearly bullshit. And I'll be honest, I had some fear at the start because we didn't know what this thing was, did we? We didn't know. Right. And potentially it could have been a nasty virus. We know that's happened in the past. However, once we sort of realized, once I started thinking about it and looking at it critically, it's okay. No, this is it's a coronavirus. It's a flu virus, right? It's another strain of that. So we don't have to worry about it. But then they shut the world down. And it's like the unbelievable narrative that's been pushed. I mean, interestingly, this week, the corporate media, I don't call them mainstream because they are corporate. Let's not pretend that they are. They've actually released statistics now, whereas at 91% of the recorded deaths here in Australia had at least one comorbidity or more. So that means essentially Australia has been shut down for 83 people dying. That's how many people have actually died from COVID. 83. Yeah. And people are like, oh, really? I'm like, yes. I've been trying to tell you for 2 years that this is bullshit. You know, this is the next step in that grand master plan that stems from the stuff that you're talking about, that the Morgans and the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and these, you know, whatever their ultimate plan is, I don't know, but it is full of conspiracy. And as you say, they've gotten away with it so much that it's, you know, I mean, there's where do you want to go next, mate? I suppose. Where do you want to go next? Do you want? I'm interested. Interested in your thoughts in Kennedy, because I've got my own thoughts about that.
Yeah, you know, Kennedy was a really interesting thing. You know, a lot of people. One of the things I liked studying about Kennedy was his secret society speech.
Yes,
because a lot of people, you know, we love talking about it and thinking about it. So I researched it really well. I read it a few times from beginning to end. And he was making a very nuanced argument in that speech that a lot of people don't realize. He was essentially appealing to the press and saying that there was kind of a kerfuffle at the time that involved essentially what he was trying to say was that the government was going to have to be more secretive with the press. In order to establish national security in a proper way, they were going to have to be a little more secretive. And then he goes on to say that, you know, we despise secrecy, and so he's making he's doing classic Orwellian doublespeak in the speech. Where he's, you know, trying to you know, pitch the two opposing ideas together, you know, which is secrecy is terrible, but listen, we're going to have to be more secret, you know, to protect some national. Now Kennedy was caught up in all sorts of things. I mean, we know the Bay of Pigs, we know everything about Cuba, but when you really look into the stuff that was being pitched to him, he did a lot of really bad things, unfortunately. You know, Operation Northwoods is one of the more popular ones that gets talked about a lot. I think it got brought up on the JRE the other day. You know, and this is where the CIA proposed committing acts of terrorism, hijacking and shooting down American airliners and hurting American citizens as a false flag to go to war with Cuba. And Kennedy essentially said no to that. But what he did say yes to was Operation Mongoose, right? So Operation Mongoose was after the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, which he was very publicly upset with the CIA about. Well, they came to him and they said, okay, we're sorry you didn't like that. We've got this idea. And he actually signed off on it. So in 1962, the CIA, with the help of the mafia, which is historical fact, executed 13 acts of terrorism against Cuban civilians, including attacks against electric power plants, oil refineries, sugar mills. And these attacks were so bad that Castro called up Khrushchev and he's like, hey, these Americans are out of control. We don't know what to do about this. And Khrushchev said, I got an idea. Let's put some, you know, missiles over there. So Operation Mongoose, Kennedy signed off on it, approved it, and it led directly to the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah, right.
And everybody likes to talk about the missiles we had in Turkey pointed at Russia. But the reality is Operation Mongoose was running through the Cuban Missile Crisis and didn't stop until Kennedy realized that if he wanted to avoid nuclear war, he was going to have to quit this operation.
Yeah, right.
And he quit the operation behind closed doors. He made the deal with Khrushchev, and we pulled out of Cuba, and we've been out, you know, in a way ever since. So, you know, as much as I want to think that Kennedy was a great hero, I think that it was hopefully Operation Mongoose and the Cuban Missile Crisis that actually took this guy who was rooted in the power structure
in
of
the
American
system,
politics. And you know, his dad, Joseph Kennedy, was a well-known admirer of Hitler as well, and other fascists.
Yes. Wasn't Joseph Kennedy? Wasn't he was the adversary in England or something like that, and he was trying to do.
He spent time in the UK. Yeah. So, you know, I think Kennedy was was part of the operation, like all American presidents are tied into all of this. And I think that when he went through all this stuff with Mongoose and Northwoods and the Bay of Pigs and all this stuff, and then the Cuban Missile Crisis, which almost could have destroyed the world, I think he realized that it was time to do something, right? And that's when he finally had the goal to stand up to the CIA, and he fired Allen Dulles. And he started making some changes to move away from and actually dismantling the CIA. And that's when, that's when he gets shot in the head.
I was just going to say, yeah, it worked out real well for him.
Yeah.
He did a good job.
Yeah.
And of course, they
give it to
convened
Oliver Stone for this.
Yeah, you do. Oliver Stone is. I haven't seen his new thing come out yet, the JFK stuff.
It's great, man. It's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember like the Kevin Costner movie is very excellent. And I think it's so hard, man. Like, how do you? Because I mean, obviously, he doesn't disband the CIA, which is what he wanted to do. He gets shot in the head, and then what? Fast forward 3 or 4 years, and you've got the Gulf of Tonkin, which never happened. And then fast forward 10 years later, and hundreds of thousands of men on both sides, and who knows what else, and another failed military campaign. It's so dark, man. And what people, I think the other thing that people don't understand is that all these names may sound familiar to some of the Australian listeners and definitely the American listeners, because they're still in power today, mate. It's not like it's changed. It's not like these people aren't still running behind the scenes, like these, JP Morgan, you could talk about the financial crisis, and they never fixed that, and if what's the next step in this game that we're playing? It is the financial squeeze. I think, my wife, she came back from the shops before we started today, and she paid $8 for 4 oranges, like,
oh my God,
like this is where we're at. And do you know what she's going to do with those 4 oranges, Dan? She's going to make quinine, because we've got a few friends down here with the spicy cough, and we've actually been making homemade elderberry and quinine, and supplying people with pre-treatment protocols.
Awesome.
Because we can't get them from the bloody doctor. Like, how ridiculous is that? However, that's where we're at at this point in time. Where do you want to go, mate? Where do you want to go? This is all very positive and uplifting.
No, man. I think we're heading in a great direction. I think my AirPods are running out of juice. I'm not really sure why. Are you okay if we take a break for a quick second? I'm going to switch over to a different audio, because I think these guys are going to give out on me any minute here.
Yeah. Let's have a look, mate.
And pick up where we left off.
Yeah, we can pause it for the second. We'll just pause for the second, guys, and we'll be back. And we're back, mate. Well, one thought I had while we were just, you mentioned Dulles and Kennedy and all that sort of stuff. You guys have a really good way of naming airports and massive monuments as a testament to these people, but a percentage of them are actually evil, nasty men. You know what I mean? Not exactly.
Yeah.
But again, is that not the narrative, mate? That's the narrative. Yeah, we name this. There's the Dulles Airport. There's all this sort of stuff. Oh, this was a great American. He was a great American, and he was a patriot. That's the term, isn't it? He was a great American patriot, and we must honor him.
Yeah.
But these people,
we love patriotism here.
Yeah. So where did you want to go, mate? We had a bit of a chat about Kennedy. We talked about Northwoods, and I think we can leave the Gulf of Tonkin. That one's pretty well established. But where do you want to take us, mate? Where do you want to take us?
Well, I think it's important to mention, before we totally move on from Kennedy and Dulles, Kennedy, obviously he fired Dulles, and then Kennedy got shot in the head, and then they put together the Warren Commission. And, what's interesting to me was who they chose to lead the Warren Commission, which was Alan Dulles.
Yes.
So, Oliver Stone, he's already covered all this. I really recommend to people, if they want to learn more about this, to go to his new documentary, because he's uncovered a lot of information. His movie inspired a lot of people to be interested. They fired a lot of Freedom of Information Act stuff, and they got a lot of stuff opened up. And then they went and studied all this stuff, and then brought it to this documentary. So needless to say, by the end of it, anyone who isn't completely convinced that the CIA was responsible for this, like every other conspiracy that's well documented and being real, we're also involved with, So I guess, I just wanted to touch on a couple more things in this regard, because, it's important as we discuss these conspiracies, for people to understand that, the stuff that we're talking about right now is all real. It really happened.
Mm-hmm.
This is all, you can go to the congressional record, the Senate committees, you can find all this stuff. It was all real. So to think that we're not capable of these things is outdated. And honestly, as a people, we should be much, much smarter about it all.
Well, I think
one of the things that I dug into.
The problem with critical thinking, Dan, is that it takes time, though. And you have to be able to be objective and let go of your misconceptions or your preconceptions about what you think is real. And I think that's because, and I would say, whether or not you agree or not, is they've designed, look, the system no longer serves us, right? We serve the system. You'd understand that by now. It's, it's nothing to do with us, it's serving us. We serve it. And because it's such, day-to-day existence is so hard just to exist day-to-day in the modern world, that applying critical thinking to this stuff, and I think to a degree as well, we've been dumbed down. A fair percentage of the population has been dumbed down to accept these narratives, and I think that's what makes it difficult. Because, as you say, and it's the same with anything. Choose a topic. This stuff is real. You can research it. It's not like we're pulling things out of thin air. It is what it is.
Right. Right.
But in order to get to that place, you must be able to think critically and release whatever preconceptions you have, which is the difficult part, because then you've got to admit that you're wrong. You've got to admit that,
Well, I think what people need to admit is that they put belief where belief wasn't deserved. They wanted to believe in an idea, and at some point they're going to have to admit that idea is just an idea. It's not a reality that any of us are living with.
Well, everything is just an idea, Dan. That's in order to understand that you know nothing, the first thing you must understand is that everything's just an idea, man. No one really knows, right? No one really knows the answer to anything. If we want to, that's a bit of a nihilistic approach. However, it is true at the same time. We have to understand that anything that we believe is just a preconceived idea that's been shared with us. So, that can be scary, but it can also be quite freeing as well. I think if you can,
absolutely,
that can send you into a mental place where it's not healthy, but it also can send you into, okay, well, if no one knows anything and nothing's real, then maybe we need to have an open perspective with everything. And through that, we can try to gain a true picture, try and truly put the jigsaw together, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting because as I was going through all this, and then, I was working with my buddy that I was telling you about, I proposed to him, I said, listen, let's think of the craziest conspiracy theory that gets dismissed all the time, and he said chemtrails, right? Everybody loves to make fun of people that believe in chemtrails.
Yeah, chemtrails is a juicy one,
Yeah, everybody loves that one. That's a fantastic one. So I was like, let's look into this. Let's see where it goes just for fun. And it didn't take me very long to pull up Operation Sea Spray.
This was one of the ones that I wanted you to talk about. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. This one's interesting, man. So, from 1949 to 1969, the U.S. government was conducting open air tests of biological agents, including a release of live bacteria over the city of San Francisco. And now they were using a bacteria that's pretty common. It's actually found if you kind of look, if you ever see, like, maybe you weren't keeping up with cleaning and you see some black stuff in your tile grout. Mm-hmm. That's actually the same bacteria that they released on the population. Mm-hmm. But what it's tied to is UTIs and hospital infections and things like that. So, they claim they weren't trying to hurt anybody. They were doing this they were working with the UK to understand this experiment, and essentially to learn more about it, you have to dig into the UK's DICE trials. Mm-hmm. So from 1971 to 1975, the UK decided that they wanted to figure out what would happen if they sprayed an area along the coast. So they had one aircraft flying along the coast, spraying an agent, and they realized that it could contaminate a target over 100 miles away, over a 10,000 square miles area. And this was known as large area coverage.
Right.
And the UK was using zinc cadmium sulfide to conduct these tests. Now, at the time, they claimed that it was, they thought it was harmless. Now it's known to be a cancer-causing agent.
Yeah.
So even if you give them the benefit of the doubt, yeah, of course, even if you give them the benefit of the doubt, you still find a situation where they were spraying chemicals on the American populace and the British populace without their knowledge. And there was a lot of things that came from this. There was metals that came from this that got into the soils and ruined some of the soils and things like that. And some people got sick. They think that maybe there was some cancer that came as a result of this. But what fascinates me is we took the most ridiculous conspiracy we could think of and then found a direct link to it that's been proven historically to have existed. So, anyone who's looking into chemtrail conspiracy could say to themselves that, realistically, this comes from the Operation Sea Spray and Dice trials. Yeah. Because that's kind of where these, this story originated from.
But then you've got to then ask the question, mate, if they did it back then, are they still, you know what I mean? Are they still doing it now? Is that, you know what I mean? Like, right. how do you know that? That's the problem with this stuff. It's like, okay, they got away with it then, with the eternal distractions that are available to us in 2022, they could be doing anything. And that's the problem with this stuff. Yeah. That's the problem.
Well, what I find interesting is that when you step back from this, and I think I mentioned this to you that if you look back to the history of the CIA, the original, version of it was the SOS or
the OSS. Yeah.
The OS. I'm sorry. Thank you. Yeah. And
we need an SOS, mate. Don't worry. We need an SOS.
Yeah. That was I don't know if that was a Freudian slip, but it was a good one.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, it was interesting because I shared with you that my grandfather was actually part of that mission during World War II when it got formed. And what he did was he posed as a journalist photographer and went into North Africa and was scouting with lots of other people, a route for the Allies to come in and essentially and get into the combat theater. And I have great pictures of him in all plain clothes. I never see anything where he's in a uniform.
No.
And all of his stuff got left to me through my grandmother, and it includes various African translations and things like that for language so that he could communicate. And so, when I started digging into this and trying to understand it, because my grandfather was a part of it, what I found was the OSS was originally created as a counterintelligence operation.
Yes,
so
yes.
not only were they supposed to gather intelligence, but they were supposed to, be a counterintelligence operation. Yeah. So one of the things I found interesting was one of their first operations was when they essentially decided that they wanted to figure out how long it would take for a news story to travel around the globe.
Yes.
So they started a rumor that Hitler had syphilis.
Yes.
Yeah. So they basically spread a rumor that Hitler had syphilis, and then they tracked how long it took to get around the world. And that was an experiment that they ran. And to this day, when you research Hitler, you'll often come across, Hitler had syphilis.
Yeah, that's a common thing.
Yeah. And they try to maybe explain that away as why, he went crazy towards the end or whatever. But
I think he went crazy towards the end because of the mixture of drugs that fat doctor was having him on. Like some of the stuff that he was on sounds insane. Yeah.
Yeah, that's only Kennedy was on better stuff.
Yeah, that's well, I mean, you talk about conspiracies, right? And then here's an interesting one about the Blitzkrieg. So there's a line of research that suggests that the entire German army was hopped up on amphetamine, right? And that's the reason they could march for 3 days straight. You know what I mean? Like that's the reason they were so hyped up and ready to go, is that they were using pharmaceuticals and, you know, in particular uppers and amphetamine to bolster their army to make those lightning moves. Like, you know, I mean, and you go, oh yeah, that's a conspiracy, but then you learn about, you know, the special forces from America, the special forces from Australia. I know some boys that were in both of those things. Like, yeah, for sure, they gave us uppers and downers and, you know, whatever we needed to get through the mission. You know, like that's not a conspiracy. That is what it still happens to this day. You know, so it's interesting stuff.
I don't, Triff, I don't, honestly, man, I don't even think that is debated anymore. I think it's pretty commonly accepted that that was what fueled the Blitzkrieg and enabled them to be as effective as they were so quickly. I think you're spot on with that, man. I don't even think anybody's arguing about that anymore. I think that's pretty accepted.
Yeah. And again, you know, but if you had said that 5 years ago, people would have been against you. Whereas now, it's readily accepted. You know, that's how these things evolve.
It takes a lot of time, but eventually, you know, the truth comes out. And you know, one of the things that was important about kind of understanding this counterintelligence aspect is that the function of the CIA at this point is not only to gather intelligence, but to make sure they muddy the waters so that the enemy, quote, air quotes, isn't able to discern what's real and what's not. So, you know, I really believe this is where the fuel for the criticisms and all of the real, you know, lambasting that goes on against conspiracy theory, because they are actively creating these false narratives.
That's right.
Around real psyops, real intelligence campaigns, so that when you focus in on these things, you see all this crazy stuff, and then you can't discern what's real and what's not. So it's all nonsense, right?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you know, we work on the when we look into any of this sort of conspiracy stuff, we sort of work on what if 1% is true. You know, like if you take all the tens of thousands of documents about choose your conspiracy theory, if you work on the what if 1% is true, you know what I mean? If 1% is true, then the world should be turned on its head with this sort of stuff. You know, if you just take 1%, I think it's more than 1%, but in order to be objective, you know, what if 1% is true? You know, what if 1% is true about all the conspiracies we've talked about today? What if 1% is true about the UFO stuff? What if 1% is true about, you know, the weird stuff they say about the moon? You know, what if 1% is true about all these big, deep things? Because you are right, mate. The disinformation is unbelievable. You know, you talk about plants in protest crowds, you know, like you talk about, you could talk about the pallets of bricks that rocked up at all the protest spots in America. You know what I mean? It's like everyone's like, oh, the construction workers left them behind. I've been in construction. We don't leave pallets of bricks around the place. Okay. You don't. Anyway, that's another.
Yeah. That's not how construction companies work. They're in it to make money, not to lose money.
Yeah. You know,
but this comes to my point of, you know, like, I think the fun thing to talk about at this point, I think, would be Epstein, right? So,
oh yes, there's a juicy one.
Yeah. So this is a perfect example of what the point I'm trying to make. So you've got an interesting situation where you've got Trump running against Hillary Clinton. And you've got this story that's about to just blow up, and there's nothing that you can do about it. And it involves everyone at the highest levels. I mean, you've got Bill Clinton, you've got the prince who just settled out of court to keep this from moving on. You've got Bill Gates tied up in this thing. You've got Trump himself photographed with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell everywhere. And, you know, you have essentially an elite cabal of pedophiles about to kind of take some hits and take some damage. So, you know, what happens simultaneously at the exact same moment? The birth of QAnon, right? So here's QAnon. It takes the most ridiculous information that has nothing and everything to do with this story, and spins it at the exact same time that you have all of this news breaking. And, we all know the QAnon story. It just happened. But, what was it? It was a conspiracy theory that got spread on the internet. That involved a global pedophile ring, and then ended up about a pizza parlor in the end, right?
Yeah.
So you have a complete nonsensical farce going on in the background of the biggest news story that probably has ever hit the political establishment of the globe.
Yes.
And everybody just tap dances away. Epstein supposedly kills himself with all the cameras off and all the guards.
Yeah, of course he did. Of course he did. Yeah, he killed himself.
And it's a perfect example of you've got a story coming. You need to protect the powerful, so you run a disinformation campaign that takes all the thunder out of it and all the attention away. And all of a sudden, everyone just moves on, and it's all good.
Yeah.
And for me, that's the perfect example.
It is the perfect example. I mean, and there's so many things. Again, it seems like I'm referencing Jocko again, but he's got another podcast called Unraveling, and he does it with a guy, Daryl Cooper, who does Martyr Made, and he's been looking into Epstein deep, man, like Epstein's connections with secret society, with Secret Service, and whether it be Israel or, like, as you say, the depth of the Epstein thing is so unbelievable that you wouldn't even, it's unbelievable. Like, and I've sort of been listening to that and keeping an eye on it, and I saw a good meme. The internet always wins in the end, doesn't it? There was a meme. It's like, oh, so we've got the names of all the Canadian truckers that are currently, and look, and this is the thing, their bank accounts have been frozen. Every time they get donated fundraising, their accounts have been frozen. Like, what's going on with those guys is unbelievable, but we don't have the, Ghislaine Maxwell's list of contacts. You know what I mean? Like, how is that?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, if you just look at the story of her dad, her dad was, it's pretty
Maxwell
safe to say
Maxwell wasn't even his
with
name.
MI6.
Yeah. Maxwell wasn't even his name. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when he died, the king of Israel, and like there was a state funeral in Israel, and they were like, his contributions to Israel can never be known, but it's unbelievable. And like, it is so twisted, man. And I suppose, and look, the problem is with me is that I go, okay, how do we continue to keep that under wraps? We release the finest piece of biological warfare the world's ever seen. You know what I mean? You talk about the spray, you talk about this stuff, what are we actually dealing with? Is this the next major conspiracy? Like, this is it sort of is now, isn't it? Right. It's like, they're slowly releasing the real data. Like I said, the tens of thousands of people have committed suicide, tens of thousands of businesses have shut in Australia. I chose not to participate in the medical experiment, so I can't be a teacher face to face, which is just ridiculous.
Oh, that's too bad. I'm sorry to hear that.
No, look, man, it is what it is. I will hold the line, mate. I have to. And it is what it is, man. And I've had, plenty of my friends who, they didn't want to lose their jobs, so they did it. But amongst those people, we've got myocarditis, we've got pericarditis, we've got severe reactions, we've got, I could name 70 people right now that are going to have lifelong complications because they chose to do that. And what's interesting about pretty much everybody we know is that they've contracted the beer virus, so it's like, is this the next conspiracy? What is actually going on, man? You know what I mean? Like, this is because if you start talking about this, then you've only got to layer it onto what's happened the last couple of years and the control and the economics. And it's, but yeah, Epstein, I don't know whether this was true or not. And it's hard, because of the disinformation too, Dan, I think you'll agree, it's hard to sift through what is true and what is not. And that's part of the plan, isn't it? That's the whole reason they do it. That's what we say. That's the disinformation.
Yeah.
And
that's the point.
Yeah, that's the point, right? That we can't identify what's real and what's not. But apparently, the judge said of the Maxwell trial, he basically, it was like he ordered the court documents sealed because it was worse than any of the conspiracy theories.
Yeah, which is often the case.
Yeah.
Which is often the case.
It's like, and when did in this system did we not as a people deserve to know? Like how is it? Like you want to expand on the pedophile stuff? Is in Australia there's a 90-year hold on an investigation, and basically that investigation has brought up that majority of our that's some thunder, must have a storm coming. There's a 90-year hold on a pedophile investigation that basically goes to the upper levels of our parliament and has done for the last 30 years. But us as Australian people,
I've read about that a little bit.
Yeah, we can't know about that. Like, how is that? What are we doing here, man? How does it get to a point where we don't, as the Australian people or as people of the globe, how come we don't need to know about this stuff? Because I think that we do. I think it goes back to, and I cannot, the name is slipping me at the moment. The report where basically we can't be told about aliens because we'll freak out, right? That was done in the 1930s. I can't remember the name of the report, but anyway, people know what it is. And I think that's part of it.
I wanted to say Jekyll Island, but I don't remember.
Yeah, Jekyll, it could be Jekyll Island, could be, yeah. But that's the thing. I think that the powers that be have decided that if we know these things, that we will freak out. And look, I'm sure a percentage of the what we would call sheep as people would freak out. But some of us and a lot of us, what the internet has done for us, and it's why we're talking now, isn't it, mate? We've connected across the globe with a like mind and a like understanding. And those that still think critically, it's not going to be a surprise to us. But if we're truly going to move forward, we need to know. But I suppose then we come back to the conspiracy and control. How do we stop this continuous narrative, which is quite clearly fucking bullshit? Stop. What do we do, man? Because how many examples could we go through? It never ends. You want to talk about, was it the LSD studies? You know what I mean? Which created the Unabomber and all these sorts of things. Like,
oh no, please let's go there because MK Ultra is one of the most fascinating pieces of American history that exists. I mean, the Church Commission, headed by Senator Nelson Rockefeller, ironically enough, exposed a lot of really interesting truths.
It's like a dozen
MK
names.
Ultra,
it's like before you keep going, it's like a dozen names, and they just sort of drop in everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell us about MK Ultra though, mate, because it's fascinating.
Well, I mean, we don't have enough time to get into all the details, but these were mind control experiments that the CIA was working on. And, I love Joe. Joe loves talking about this stuff. He's covered it really well. But like you were saying with the Unabomber being part of the LSD experiments at Harvard, let's look at the other people that were part of that study. You have Ken Kesey, famous author who wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, was instrumental in creating the acid test parties with his buddy who also took part in those experiments, Robert Hunter, who is a well-known Grateful Dead lyricist. These guys started this movement of this. You've got obviously Timothy Leary, who was encouraging students to tune in and drop out. Right? Yeah. And, all these kids were dropping out.
Stuff's interesting as well. Yeah.
Charles Manson, Chaos, by Tom O'Neill gets into this really well. There's also another fascinating book on this subject called Strange Scenes Inside the Canyon. The subtext is Laurel Canyon, Covert Ops, and the Dark Heart of the American Dream. I highly recommend this book. It's my favorite conspiracy theory that I can't prove. But he does a great job. I think if you look at Chaos and you look at this book and you put them together, the 60s becomes a completely different topic of discussion, perhaps.
It does, man. It does. I mean, you talk about, the interesting thing about, when everything was made Schedule 1, the drugs were made Schedule 1, you can talk about the fact that I think the story goes that Nixon, put a heap of scientists on to try and find negative effects of, weed and acid and all these things. And he couldn't do it. right? So instead, he just outlawed them all, and we still deal with that to this day. I mean,
absolutely.
At least America is beginning to see clear with the with the cannabis stuff. But I mean, how many decades was that? Because some paper mill guy wanted to keep his pine forests. That's a conspiracy too.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So mate, look, we're probably getting towards the end. I know it's getting late over where you are. Because look, I don't know about you, Dan, but you're coming back, mate. I really enjoyed this. We have to sit down again. I want to maybe talk to your journalist friend if he's open to a discussion.
Absolutely.
I think we could do a tripod there where we could join in and have a round table discussion about many different things. But what's something left of field, or you mentioned archaeoastronomy and all these sorts of things. Like there's so many topics where we could go. What's one you'd like to finish on?
I guess the first thing that jumps out at me is as we're kind of talking about conspiracy theory and the demonization of it. One of the people that I love to talk about, and I'm a big fan of his before he passed, was William Cooper.
Yes.
William Cooper is a great story because he was a naval intelligence officer who saw a lot of documents roll through. He had top secret clearance. He was looking at a lot of things about UFOs, and he went out there and he really pushed these ideas. And what happened later on in his life was he started talking about the fact that he felt that he had been shown things purposefully, that he was purposefully misled in a direction.
Yes.
To believe some things. And he had kind of moved away from his theory of the UFO conspiracy. And his thing was he started kind of looking at the theory of Project Bluebeam, where he seemed to kind of endorse the idea of the fact that there might be a fake alien contact that could be used to garner some more power, like all of these things seem to do in the end.
Yeah.
And for those people that don't know much about William Cooper, he on June 28th, 2001, he went into great detail about how there was an attack coming in America, and they were going to pin it on Islamic terrorist with connections to the CIA named Osama bin Laden, and who of course came through the Mujahideen, which was funded by the CIA. And he talked about
they were
this.
good friends, and don't forget that the bin Ladens were good friends with the Clintons, and like that's a whole twisted.
The Bush family, particularly, great friends. There was even one of the bin Ladens was in Texas and was considered a member of the Bush family at that point.
Yeah.
But he tried to tell everybody this was coming, and without diving into 9/11, he was justified in the end.
Yeah, let's and look, this is not a yes or no question. I'm going to make it. Is 9/11 one of the next great conspiracies, do you think, or?
It's too soon to tell because, like you were saying, with the 90-year lock on the information, this information isn't going to be available for a long, long time till it doesn't matter anymore and we can sift through it. But, what I found interesting was that, it was November 5th, 2001, when William Cooper's property was approached by agents of the government, and they shot him dead in front of his own house. And his voice was silenced and it was gone. And one of the last points that I heard William Cooper make, unfortunately, before he was shot dead in front of his house, was he was talking about Alex Jones a lot, which I found very interesting. He didn't like Alex Jones. He was convinced Alex Jones was a CIA disinformation peddler. And
that's not the first time I've heard that.
Well, it's interesting because when you go back and you look at kind of the way that Alex is really good at getting lots of things right.
Yes.
And getting called out really terribly for, things that he gets wrong. And so, when I think back on Cooper talking about that, he is the perfect person to really, spread some of these ideas out and really muddy the waters of everything that he's involved with. And it's interesting to see some of the sympathy towards him. And I always wonder, we'll never really know, but, before Cooper died, that was something that he was talking about a lot. So from the left field, that's something that I always like to
I think
about.
what I see too in one of the, because you can't help, as you say, you're a truth seeker like myself. You're a critical thinker, so I'm sure you've thought about a lot of this stuff. And I saw 9/11 as the creation of the fear-generated society. Right, that was when, there's a suspicious bag in the shopping center. You know what I mean? Like there's, like that was the creation of the fear-generated society. And I can't help but think, and again, no proof, this is just me. Mind experiments, you know what I mean? It's like the fear-generated society culminated in what we've experienced over the last 2 years. Because that's where I grew up in the 80s and the 90s. We weren't scared. You know what I mean? Like we knew our neighbors. We was very community focused, all that stuff. Whereas these days, most people don't even know who their neighbors are. Whereas I remember as a kid, being a kid, we'd have, we play cricket down here. It's like your baseball, and we'd play cricket in the street, and there'd be a communal barbecue where someone would drag a barbecue out, and everyone would put meat on the barbie. You know what I mean? And that stuff is now gone. And the primary reason for that was the fear generated society that was created through the terrorist attacks at 9/11. And you're right. I don't think we'll ever know, but it smells, that one. It doesn't smell good, that one. There's something about it.
It's one of those things where, as an American, I was captivated in the moment, watching the television like everybody else.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
And, there was so many things revealed when you were watching it live that have been erased and washed over since.
Absolutely.
So, regardless of, I'm not willing at this point to jump in and totally say, but I can also, feel really confident in the fact that so much of the narrative doesn't make any sense.
No.
So many ways,
It smells. It smells, but it's not something that. Actually, you like this, right? So you like this. I was staying. I was in my 20s when that happens. I was staying at my parents' house for some reason. I don't remember why. And anyway, it happened, right? And my younger brother was up late watching TV, and he tells the same story that everybody tells. He thought it was a movie, right? He's switching channels and he thought it was a movie. And when he figured out it wasn't a movie, he comes into my bedroom. He wakes me, and he goes, two planes just flew into the Twin Towers in America. And I rolled over. I looked at him. I said, "Oh well, we're all fucked now." And then I just rolled back and went back to sleep. That's all I said.
Yeah. The overstep at that point of really, really digging deep and stripping away some of the liberties that we fought for in this country so hard.
That have never been given back. That have never been given back.
No,
and then we're doubled down on over the last 2 years, mate. That's the other thing too, isn't it?
Yeah, like everything else with the Snowden thing, Snowden's on, he's hiding out in Russia because he told the truth.
Yeah.
And we see this every day now. It's, Biden was just on TV talking about this Ukraine thing, which is a ridiculous farce. And, what a great way to distract from the fact that the CIA were just discovered, right? Because the Snowden information was a real attack on the NSA, the National Security Agency.
Absolutely, yeah.
And but now what's just come out while Biden's talking about Ukraine is that the CIA has also been monitoring American citizens.
Of course they
have. And that story got swept under the rug. You know what I mean?
And this is
every time you hear these guys, it's the same thing.
And that's the whole thing too. It's like, because the the common population, I suppose, for the want of a better term, is now waking up to the fact that the pandemic has pretty much been bullshit, right? A lot of it.
Certainly overhyped. Certainly overhyped.
Absolutely. Yeah. Look, I'm not saying, as I say, I'm not on complete crazy town conspiracy with it. It does exist, all these sorts of things, and the initial reaction was probably justified. Whether or not it was a piece of biological warfare, I personally think it was. That's another one of those things we'll never know. However, now that we need to hold these people to account for basically destroying our lives, and
completely disrupting the global economy.
Yeah.
And we didn't even get into global narratives, but
no.
It's the most efficient global narrative that's ever been.
It's been unbelievable, man. It's unbelievable how quickly it happened. Like, I was in logistics for a very long time, right? That was my profession. I was a logistician, is basically what they used to call me. If you've got weird and wonderful things, you call me, right? To move it from one place in the jungle to the desert. And I bounced around Australasia doing that for many years. And like, I live in I suppose what you call a country town outside of Brisbane. And within a month, they had form-fitted plastic shields fitted to the registers at our shop, at our Woolworths, right, which is our local shopping centre. And I'm like, hang on a minute. I know about production. I know about logistics. These were ready to go, right? To reach a regional shop, to have those installed, it's like you had to design them, cut them, press them, make them, ship them. That happened within 4 weeks. That's not,
Yeah, well, if you remember too, at the beginning of the outbreak, it was, we were told, listen, it's going to be 1.5 2 years before we can get a vaccine for this thing.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's, good news, DARPA, nobody knows what the hell DARPA actually does.
Yeah.
But good news, DARPA's worked on this, mRNA technology that we're going to be able to turn into vaccines quickly, which we found don't work like traditional vaccines.
No. Well, actually, we had to redefine the word vaccine. We've had to redefine.
They redefined it. That's right. Yes. Yeah. In true Orwellian fashion.
That's right. Yeah. Misspeak and wrong speak. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. Just redefine it. You'll be fine. Yeah.
Do you know and I don't know, you may have sort of heard me talking about it last year. We were going to dedicate episode 150 to 1984 by George Orwell, and myself and a couple of the founding coders, we read it individually, and man, that was so depressing because he didn't win in the end, right? He just and it's all that double speak and misinformation and stuff that just doesn't exist. It's like. And it is like the fuel price thing. It's like, it's $1.85 for a litre of diesel at the moment down here, which is unbelievable. You know what I mean? So that's like a quarter of a gallon. So that'd be.
We're going through the same thing, yeah.
And it's like, we'll take it down to $1.60. Isn't that good of us? Yeah, yeah. It used to be 90 cents, but $1.60 is better than $1.80. And I think one of my big concerns, mate, to sort of maybe wrap it up, is that. The name of this episode came through early on, and it's conspiracy and control. And what I'm very concerned about is the conspiracy and the control that we have given these people. I mean, the names that we've mentioned today are still in control of this global narrative. We didn't even get into the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab and
good old Klaus, yeah. Klaus is great. Have you seen him in his black spacesuit?
Oh man, don't even get me started. Where's he? He's hiding somewhere.
Fantastic.
You know what I mean? He's hiding somewhere, isn't he?
And the author of the great narrative.
Yeah, the author of the great narrative. It's like, and this is another one of the conspiracies, isn't it? It's like a year ago, they're like, how do you know this is going to happen? It's not like it's written down anywhere. Well, it's literally written in stone on the Georgia stones that just appeared out of nowhere one day, and no one knows who put them there. And then there's a bloody book about it that he's outlining exactly what he wants to do, and that the World Economic Forum has pervaded every level of government all over the world. Like our health minister, not only is he not a doctor, he was the economist for the World Economic Forum. So we're in good shape down here, mate. It's going to work out well.
Yeah, and where's he coming from? Good old Davos, Switzerland.
Exactly. Coming out of Switzerland, the neutral
Yeah.
country. The neutral country.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Those
well, mate.
heroes over there.
Yeah, exactly, man. Well, listen, Dan, I've really, really enjoyed this, mate. I'm so happy that we finally sat down and had this discussion. And whether you like it or not, you're coming back because we didn't even
Sounds good, Trev.
we didn't even scratch the surface on so many of these other topics. And I know you like the megalithic stuff as well. So and I think that was maybe the last time that science and spirituality were one, and we may have understood what it was like to be human. Is that me hoping and maybe looking through rose-colored glasses? Maybe I can admit that, but yeah, man, I don't have much more.
And maybe the wrong group of people survived that catastrophe.
Yeah, I think that was an idea that I don't know whether we've spoken about it on the podcast, but that's one of the problem is, mate, is that I've got a cabinet here, a cabinet there, there's one over there, and there's like 15 pages of research on 100 different topics. So one of the ideas I had, and one of the ideas we spoke about one night, and don't know if it's a mic or not, was that, right? So if it was if science and spirituality were one, and similar today, hunter-gatherers existed, and a global understanding of religion existed, for want of a better term, where we honored people for who they are, not their color, creed, anything else like that. But then there was materialists, right? So who's going to survive a cataclysm? It'll be the materialists who build the ship and build the thing and all that sort of stuff. And potentially that's who did survive the cataclysm, mate, or overwhelmingly survive the cataclysm. And therefore, fast forward 11,000 years and here we are, it's,
yeah, absolutely, man.
Well, thanks very much, Dan. I really appreciate it, mate. Stay safe over there, and we'll talk again soon.
All right, Trev, you as well, man. Thanks again.
Thanks, mate. Just want to go again?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Go again.
All right. I know you been here before. No surprises, settle the score. I know the darkness deep inside, reckless rage, poison pride. I know the anger, I know the pain, and I know the fear we do not name. And the one who comes to find me when my time is through, I know you, I know you. Wow. I know you. Better.